Hey everybody, it's 2:30. We're gonna wait about 30 more seconds before we get started. Looks like our special guest is on here. Hi, Will. Um, and just a couple of housekeeping things. We want this to be interactive, so if you have any questions during our presentation, feel free to raise your hand using the button in the uh, Zoom, or just taking yourself off of mute so that you can ask your question. Um, and we are going to be talking about uh about myth busting today. So it should be an interesting topic. If you We will be sending out a recording of this video afterwards. So if you have to hop off for some reason, we totally understand. So, my name is Tish Mindemann, and I am the communications manager here at IFAI. IFAI started at the University of Arkansas Law School by Stacy Leeds and Janie Sims Hip, two Native American female lawyers. And oops, don't know why my share went away, but here we go. Can you guys see this screen? Okay. So our mission is really to enhance tribal communities' healthy food systems and those kinds of things um, through diversified economic development, cultural food traditions. We provide food safety trainings. We provide Tribal Department of Agriculture uh, consultations. We do research and policy, where Jamie is on the front lines of watching all of the congressional hearings, so you guys don't have to, and she takes notes about that. If there's any kinds of uh, issues uh, like the Fidipper warehouse issue, we go ahead and look through all of that and put out policy and research about those things. So today we're going to talk about the ag census and some of the myths. So we're going to talk about why there's distrust surrounding the census, busting 5 myths, and then we'll have our guest speaker, Wil Hundl from NASS. So Jamie, I'm going to let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tish. So just to kind of go back over some of the topics that we've covered before, our first webinar actually discussed the history of the ag census and the different time periods that Native Americans specifically have experienced with the ag census. These were colonialism, the treaty era, the removal era, the reservation era, allotment era, reorganization era, termination era, and self-determination era, which we are currently in. So that's just kind of a refresher. And then our second webinar covered a key and complex topic, which is the land itself and the numbers of acreage and just sort of how Indian country has farmed differently over different times and how complex the system for counting those lands is. The third webinar was an in-depth analysis on the economics and market value of Indian country ag and the incredible growth that we've seen in that sector. We were joined by the fabulous Skye Ducheneau, who was able to give us really great insights as to what producers are seeing on the ground in terms of market value and just the different economic perspectives. And then most recently in June, we went over the different trends that we've seen in Indian country ag. So we talked about what kind of crops are produced and the size of farms, just everything in between that. And we had a panel of two, IFAI's IFAI's very own Casey Captain, our tribal outreach and policy specialist, and then a very special guest, Wayne Smith. I hope Wayne's on today. Um, but So that's kind of where we've come from. And then if we circle back to that first webinar, we talked a lot about the general distrust that a lot of communities have in the ag census. Um, we've come a long way, but the distrust is deeply ingrained in many tribal producers' belief systems. There's also just been a huge lack of information, and the government has used data in the past to do harm to Native American communities. So there's also just the lack of trust because they're also in remote locations a lot of the time, and it's harder to get in contact with them and accurately represent them in the data. So we've not always been included, and it hasn't just always been a clear picture as to what is actually going on in Indian country or agriculture and farming. And then another kind of to play off of that is just that sometimes the data is released staggered. Back in June, we actually got the full race, ethnicity, gender profile sheets. And then tomorrow, we're actually going to be getting the Indian reservation data. And so all these things can kind of be confusing as well to people who hear, oh, well, I heard back in February that the data came out. Why do you still not have it? So, a lot of these can lead to misconceptions, and as we're going to call them in this, myths. So let's go over sort of the myths that we have heard or that we are going to bust today. So the first myth is that the family farm is dying. Um, I've heard this a lot personally, um, and it's it comes from people saying that traditional farms are declining, especially with non-native farmers. Native owned farms are still closely by our families. And then the age of producers is trending downwards. So while the number of traditional farms is declining, Indian country census numbers indicate an increase in closely held and family farms. And those are including young producers. Young producers are starting farms and ranches and engaging in intergenerational operations. Um, Also, tribal food sovereignty initiatives are aligned with encouraging new producers and supporting existing producers. So, just to kind of help their operations grow and expand. And then this is very prevalent. Like we can see this in the data just from the 2017 to 2022 changes that are on the slide right now. Um, it just shows that Indian country is telling a different story than the overall numbers of all farms. So we can see that the number of young producers younger than 34 has actually increased by 24% or increased by 12%, which, when you hear 12%, it may not seem like that big of a deal, but when you look on the national average, especially, like it's a huge deal to come from Indian country where, there's not even necessarily that much access to programs to get youth involved. So just to see that growth is very exciting. And in that same time span, there's an increase of more than 2,500 producers um, presently on farms in the 5 to 9 year category. So this just indicates that producers are making it beyond the critical 5 year mark when many new businesses fail. So, and we see then even past the 10 year mark, the numbers just skyrocket. And so that's really exciting. But yeah, so the overall census numbers show a decline in farms and acreage, um, but an increase in producer age. So Indian country's numbers bust this myth wide open. And now, the second myth that we've heard is that the only livestock that native producers raise is bison. The fact of the matter is that native farmers raise more beef than bison. Sheep, goats, poultry, they're all way more abundant than bison. And we've seen a lot of growth in this sector. even since 2017, but I'm sure as most people are familiar, bison were hunted to near extinction. So there's actually only been, um, in 2022, there was almost 2,000 bison farms, a little less than that, counted in the ag census. But in 2017, there was only 1,700. So there was growth in that. So that's very exciting that, even though they may not be the only thing that Native Americans farm, it is going well. Um, and some of you guys may be familiar with the Intertribal Buffalo Council. We work with them a lot. And they have reported that there's about 80 tribes in 20 different states that are actually facilitating the management of about 20,000 buffalo. So again, that's very exciting, but not the only things that native producers do. And so you can kind of see the breakdown on this chart that Tish has pulled up. And what's always funny to me too is, along with the aquaculture and different things, there's always still an other category. Um, and you could be thinking, well, what the heck is other? But others actually usually defined as honey or bison are in that category. Deer and elk that are held in captivity can be counted as other, alpacas, llamas, mink and rabbits, but only if they're alive, and then equine products, and then just like some general other livestock. But I was in Little Kansas the other day, just across the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, and I swear I saw a camel in someone's yard. And the first thing that popped in my mind was, I wonder how they've got that counted on the ag census. So, there's always a category, but the bottom line is Native American producers are producing a lot, and some even have camels, so not just all bison. And then we'll go on to our third myth. So this is one that even I definitely bought into before I really got in this line of work. I thought that everything was big ag, and just that only factory farms and large corporations kind of took it over. Um, and I think that that is something that is definitely easy to buy into and feel like, you're the underdog. But the truth is that agriculture is so diverse, and small and medium farms are just as important to agriculture as a large farm. Um, but this just also isn't true. I mean, the economic class of farms in Indian country absolutely do not support this myth. Small and medium farms are a huge part of the agriculture industry and the supply food chain, to the United States and in Indian country it's vital to it. We can see in the data that there's a large difference in ownership between the farmers, and kind of the land that they own. Most of them are fully owned. Some are leased, or partially owned, but also a good chunk of them are leased. And so that can kind of look like, you know, grazing permits or just different things like that. The most common leases in agriculture is land leases. So the cash rent lease and the crop share, they're pretty common, but for the most part, we can just bust this myth, by looking at the economic class of Indian country. You can see how much money that Indian country farms are bringing in, and less or around 30% of all Indian country farms produce less than $1,000. And then about 64% of all Indian country farms produce less than $10,000. So these are not big ag. They are your mom and pop, they're your farmers market, you know, it's just people who are on smaller operations that are still such a huge part because, you know, this is making up more than half. So, absolutely not. We are not entirely big ag. Um, and yeah, this is just kind of another way to get into leasing because it is just a different way to use your land and to even profit off of it. if we have any questions about it, we can kind of get into that more. But let me tell you, grazing permits are a rabbit hole. So I think we can move on, yeah, to myth number 4. Um, we've all heard the rumors that Native Americans get a check every month, and some people think that Native farmers are also heavily supported by the government. Um, this, of course, we all know is not true, but we can just bust this myth wide open given the lower number of federal dollars that Native American farmers receive. Um, as you can see, this is a staggering, like super staggering, like data set right here that all farms get just entirely more than native producers have. The USDA has actually just finished their investigations for discrimination cases and has given out the reward money for that. And while we don't have a breakdown of exactly who the types of like racial profiles of the people who were discriminated against, a lot, the highest numbers did come in like highly native populated states like Oklahoma. I think Arizona was one, Mississippi. So, we can infer. But and another part of this myth is that it has a lot of different roots, and some of that can come from the land leasing and, land held in trust and the royalties that come from that. But again, we can even see from the Commodity Credit Corporation loans and the federal farm programs, um, they have just so significantly less loans. I mean, 104 compared to 483,000. You know, I think that it just it comes from a lot of just places of not understanding how things are really entirely working, but you know, we busted it. So y'all can spread this information and tell everyone it ain't true. So the fifth and final myth that we're busting is that farming is a man's world. Again, something that we hear on a lot of different levels about a lot of different things. But Indian country, we are different. Native producers are almost neck and neck at 50-50. And agriculture is just a huge part of a lot of native cultures. And even though it's thought to be a male dominated field, there's just really not that much of a gap. And I think that this can be contributed to cultural reasons. There's a lot of early literature about how shocked the first colonizers, I mean, explorers, were when they came to our lands and saw that the women were doing all the like hard work of agriculture, of, you know, tending to the fields and lands and things like that. Um, and then they wrote that the men were hunters and would fish, but for the most part, they thought that men were lazy. But it's just how we had different systems. So it was very much a European mindset that women were weaker and should be sheltered. So we just come from a long line of that. But I think another interesting aspect to note is that many tribes have creation stories that center around feminine agriculture beings. I know for us Cherokee specifically, we have Selu, who is the corn mother. Um, and so there's just so many examples of this. We can even think about like the three sisters and how they have really become almost like a pan-Indian type symbol of companion planting. And I've heard stories about, river spirits of being feminine and, tending to the waters and the plants. The Cherokee creation story about strawberries too. Again, it's just something that it's just different for us. And even though there have been a lot of male domination in the field in the like recent years, or I should say like modern day, there's still huge emphasis on bringing more women into agriculture. And through things like FFA and 4-H, I know that it's it's a big priority for people nowadays too. But yeah, so this myth is busted. Women do it just as good, if not better. So I think that that's all of our myths. So, do we have any questions first about our myths before we pan it over to our special guest? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm going to toss it over to Tish, who will moderate our questions for our guest from the National Agriculture Statistics Survey.
Thanks, Jamie. I'd like to welcome Wil Hundl Jr. He's the Director of Field Operations in the Southern Plains Regional Field Office of the National Agricultural uh, Statistics Service through the USDA. He's been doing this work deep in the ag census for several years. I kind of feel like we're kindred spirits, Wil. IFAI likes to describe ourselves as the tribal ag nerds on call, and we love a good chart diagram or set of stats. So, can you tell us a little bit about your work with the ag census and why is it worth the producer's time to fill out the census?
Sure. Thanks again, Trish, for the opportunity to join you all. This is amazing. And Jamie, man, I love the charts you threw up here. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm going to take this back to our group because this is what we're all about. All right. So we collect data, we publish reports and we put a census out every 5 years. Big deal, right? When the people actually use the information they provide us to help further their ventures, their communities, what have you, that's the most rewarding part of anything that I've ever done. So thank you for this. I mean, this is a great opportunity. Why do we do this? Well, one thing is part of what we do is mandated by Congress. We do provide statistics that are in the economic indicators. So we're required to do that. But the majority of what we do, it's to support agriculture, agricultural services, support personnel, support programs, and most of all, to support the producers. So I don't know how many more questions you have. I can go on for hours. This is tremendous. I love this. Thank you all for attending. This is awesome.
Yeah. So, when you are talking about to support agriculture, how does an individual producer filling out this ag census, because it's a pretty lengthy form, how does that really affect programs within the USDA?
Well, let's take this into like two different parts. And I'm just straight up front with everybody on this call and anybody I talk to about the census. You fill out that form. It is fairly lengthy. It covers every aspect of agriculture because we only do it every 5 years. But to send that in is probably not going to get you any reward today or tomorrow. Okay. It's just the wheels of government take a long time to turn. What's important though, and especially if you go out to our website and look at the state and county profiles for your specific areas, that has three statistics that I always point out to everyone that's truly important. The number of farms in your county, the land and farms in your county, and the market of value of agricultural products sold in that county. Because those three things say one thing. They tell you how important agriculture is, both body-wise as well as economic-wise to your county. So if you remove agriculture from the county, that's how much money on an annual basis your county could be losing.
So our webinar today has been about common myths that we hear about in tribal agriculture. Can you tell us about any myths that you hear about in your capacity?
Sure. And we get a lot of times, people fill out this form. They say, oh, well, you're going to turn it over to the IRS or you're going to give it to lawyers or something. That's the first myth. We are guided by Title VII of U.S. Code and protected with the SIPSEA Act. It's confidentiality in agricultural statistics programs. But it basically says we can only use the statistical data that we collect to compile aggregated totals in statistical reports. And that's the only thing we can use. If we divulge any particular person's information or share it with anybody else, we would get fined and put in prison, fined $250,000, put in prison for 10 years. And ladies and gentlemen, I have a young family. I don't want to spend time away from them.
Absolutely. Um, so you just aggregate this data. So it's not like this data is about somebody's specific farm that you publish. It's about an aggregate or an overall picture of what it looks like.
That's exactly right. And I'll follow that up by saying, you know, any individual report to me is worthless. I can't do anything with an individual report. But together, combining those reports, either at a commodity level or a county level or some aggregation, that's the power in the data.
Was there anything surprising about this set of census data for you?
Not surprising. I mean, there's another 6 million new data points out there, and we keep adding to them. We have some more follow-on projects that will be coming out later this year. Um, but as you noted, you know, and this is why I'm so excited. I hope you include me on future webinars because it's excited that people are looking at the data and have questions about it. You're right. We issued volume 1 in February 13th of this year. That was to get the big census out to everybody. Okay, but there's a lot of other pieces that we have to then aggregate in different forms to make sure that we protect people that report, you know, so that we don't disclose individual informations when we are getting down to a, say, a county profile level, or when we were doing congressional district totals or watershed totals. You know, that takes a little bit more time. So our first effort is to get the volume 1 data out there. And then we start focusing on these other pieces, the race, ethnicity, and gender profiles that we released, and some of these others that have been coming out. So it takes a little time to get all this out. We want to make sure, first of all, that we protect the people's identity that provide us the information.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how NASS is trying to improve its outreach into Indian country?
Absolutely. And I had the honest privilege of spending 10 years in Oklahoma. I arrived there in February of 2006, right before the 2007 census started. So I was hustling. My call to duty was you got to get out in Indian country and you know get people to report. I didn't do so good in 2007. I tried, and one thing I learned is there is a lot of mistrust out there for the government. You cannot go one time and introduce yourself and explain what you want and why it's important. I mean, there were oftentimes 6 or 7 visits before I even got to the person I needed to visit with. And I understand that. I mean, this is business. This is people's lives. You know, you're telling stuff about your operation. You want to make sure you know this person. So I continued working after the 7th census came out. We started trying to work with some of the community-based organizations, the tribal nations out there, and to show them how this data is, what it is, where it is, how to use it. 2012 was a completely different picture. We were actually the first ones in the whole country to send in the first census report in 2012. That made me feel a little proud. We're getting somewhere. But still today, I mean, anywhere, my counterpart there in Oklahoma, Troy Marshall, he's on the ground in Oklahoma and continues to carry on the outreach efforts that we started back then. But it's not anything that we can say, okay, well, we're going to do it before the census, and then after the census, we're going to give some release stuff, and that's it. This is an everyday effect. You have to visit with people all the time, be there for them, provide them the services, help them with the data, navigate the portals, whatever you want to do. When they're successful, then we're all successful.
Yeah, I met Troy at the ACES science fair, and he was out doing outreach. He was actually judging the the different science fair projects from the Native American students, and it was really cool to like see how much he loves the statistics and how much he loves that, and then also to see how he's reaching out to, you know, to tribes and to even the next generation of tribal agricultural leaders.
Absolutely. We always, for the last, I don't know how many years now, we've been going to the Intertribal Agricultural Council. They usually have it in Las Vegas in December. And so we used the power and the outreach activities that we were doing in Oklahoma and helped expand that to some of our other states in other tribal nations. And, you know, we made some progress, but I mean, we're never going to say that we're finished because we're not.
Yeah. So is there any words of wisdom or anything that you want to impart or leave with our audience today that we haven't covered?
Well, I'm just, again, I'm so happy to see this information being shared and being put out there. You have my contact information. Please share it with everybody here, Troy's as well. If you're not in Texas or Oklahoma and in your other regions, if you're looking for a contact, let us know. We'll hook you up. It is so important that you have that interpersonal dialogue with the NASS people. I mean, we may not have the answer for you today, and the data may not be available today, but it doesn't mean that we won't work for you in the future to try to get you that information.
Yeah. And something that we've been doing with this agricultural census data, we did it for the 2017 and we're going to do it again for the 2022, is we break it also down by BIA region, and look at how BIA regions match up with the NASS statistics and stuff like that. So I'll make sure that I send that out to you.
That'd be awesome. And if there's other, you know, data products like that that you do on a routine basis, that's, again, let's talk about it. It may be something that we can incorporate in our analysis to where it's just another product that comes out so you don't have to do the work.
Thank you so much, Wil. Does anyone have any questions for Wil or for myself or Jamie? Wil's last name is Hundl. I believe I'm saying that right.
That's correct. Hundl. We're shortchanged the E.
And I'll make sure that I send out his contact information as well as Troy's. And we've put some links to the census inside of the chat, including that county data, and then also the race, gender, and oh, I can't ever remember what the E stands for.
Ethnicity.
Ethnicity. So race, ethnicity, and gender. Um, so you can follow us on, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have YouTube. This webinar and then all of our previous webinars are on there. We also have food safety webinars and some food preservation webinars on there. So check us out on all of our social media. Our next one will be on September 18th, and we will be digging into the American Indian Reservation data a little bit closer and looking at that kind of stuff. That comes out tomorrow, I believe. And so that'll give us just under a month to dig through all of those statistics. And if you have any questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking in the chat or asking out loud, you can certainly contact us at agpolicy@uark.edu. So we'd love to thank Wil for showing up, Jamie doing all this hard research for us and really digging into it. And so we appreciate everyone, and we will see you on the 18th.